What's up, guys? It's Health Max here. Today we're going to be looking at every argument that humans are carnivores. Now, just to get this straight, these are all arguments that are based on hard facts and hard sciences such as anthropology, biochemistry, biology, physiology, and making hard inferences and logical inferences from those facts. So no BS studies, no human nutrition, quote-unquote science. That's purely associative and usually epidemiological and cannot definitively prove anything and are just flawed in many ways. So let's get into it. First of all, I'm going to define what I mean when I say that humans are carnivores. Technically, there's an argument to be made that humans are omnivores because we can subsist off of both plants and off of meat, right? Because there's some vegans, vegetarians who eat predominantly plants, and no matter how unhealthy you argue they aren't dying on the spot. They're still living. And obviously, there are people who eat just meat, and they're also not dying and are thriving, actually. But in that sense, we're omnivores, so you might be saying, where's the argument that we're carnivores? But I feel like that definition is a bit pointless because that can also be said about cats. Like, for example, cats can also be omnivores because they survive off of meat mostly, right? Obviously, as we all know, but they can also survive off kibble, and sometimes cat owners feed their pets purely plant-based kibble for many years, and that's usually why they die a lot earlier and are very unhealthy. But they're still technically can subsist off of other foods. So that's why I think that kind of definition is pointless. So even though we're technically omnivores, we're hypercarnivorous in the sense that just like a cat is hypercarnivorous despite it being able to adapt to maybe other lifestyles, even if they're way unhealthier, so are omnivores, and we fully thrive and are fully optimal on meat, predominantly meat, just like a carnivore would. So the first argument is what humans eat in nature. The sense of this argument is that the most ideal diet for an animal should just be what that animal eats in nature. For example, cows eat grass because a cow in nature just eats grass, and cows have always eaten grass in nature. So therefore, that's what they should eat. So how do we look at to see what humans eat in nature? So stable isotope analyses, when they observed the long bones of pre-agricultural humans, which were the closest humans that were living as close to nature before the agricultural revolution over 12,000 years ago, all over the world, they were predominantly eating meat. Over 89% of their diet was from animal foods, purely meat. So that, by definition, would already make us hypercarnivorous, because hypercarnivorous animals just have to be at least 70% meat. Now, you might be thinking, isn't that kind of a pointless argument? Because it's like an appeal to nature, some would say, or maybe an appeal to tradition, because so what have we been doing the whole time? Well, first of all, when we look at what happened when the agricultural revolution hit, which is the first time in human history when plants started becoming a very significant part of our diet, as you can see, this is right at the cutoff of where the agricultural revolution happened, and our heights just started going down and completely dropping until we were able to pick them back up recently. And also, our jaw size decreased, our skull size decreased dramatically, and our brain size decreased too. And not only that, but using logic from the fact of evolution, we are evolutionary adapted through natural selection to eat meat because that's what we've predominantly been doing for most of our speciation. Now, evolution is a fact. It is a fact that genes change according to the stimulus in the environment around them in order to adapt. The theory of evolution, which is that we come from monkeys, that is so controversial, is not part of the fact of evolution, which is that genes change according to the stimulus. So therefore, our genes are adapted to eating meat and are evolved to eat meat because that's what we've been doing for so much of our speciation. Now, the second argument is that all plants are toxic. Essentially, plants are not the same as animals. They can't attack, they can't move, they can't run, but they still don't want to get eaten. They want to live. So therefore, they use chemical warfare and are naturally poisonous. That's why 99.9% of plants are completely inedible and are completely toxic and poisonous. All plants are actually poisonous to some degree, but there are some that we can eat, and they aren't fatally poisonous, but they still contain an endless list of toxins, identifiable toxins such as oxalates, phytic acid, lectins, tannins, etc., etc. The third argument is that all plants are indigestible to some degree. This is because of something called fiber. Now, you might have been told that fiber is such an incredible thing. It's the key to proper gut function and proper human health. All that is from epidemiological data that really can't definitively prove anything about cause and effect and heart health in humans. And the truth is, fiber isn't a nutrient. Fiber, at its core level, is just the indigestible part of a plant. Fiber is completely indigestible to humans, and every plant has some degree of fiber to it, which means every plant is, to some degree, indigestible. And last I checked, if something is indigestible, you shouldn't be eating it. Also, the issue with this is that a lot of the nutrients that are supposedly in plants are actually bound to the fibrous part of the plant. And since that part of the plant is completely indigestible, you're not actually absorbing those nutrients in the plant either. Now, the fourth argument sort of builds on the last two and is basically a response to the reply that some might say, well, maybe these toxic defense compounds that plants have to protect themselves and the fiber that we can't really digest, that's indigestible, like maybe it's not that big of a deal. Like, are they really, maybe they're just negligible. So we're going to look at the fourth argument, which is that other animals can disarm plant toxins and break down fiber. And essentially, the logic follows, if every other animal that's designed to eat plants has such complicated mechanisms in order to disarm those specific plant toxins from the plants that it eats, then why should we be eating plants? Like, clearly they have some kind of danger. So we're going to use a few examples. For example, cows have 4 stomach chambers, and they have a rumen. 4 stomach chambers for breaking down fiber, and they have billions of microbes in their gut that's able to break down fiber for them so they can absorb it as saturated fat. Koalas, for example, they have an enzyme in their gut called tannase, which is basically able to break down tannins, which is a type of plant defense compound that I might have mentioned earlier, and it can break it down into glucose into a more bioavailable and useful form. Now, humans don't have hardly any such mechanisms. We do have very few mechanisms against plants and toxins. For example, we can very partially ferment fiber, but the rest of it is still completely indigestible. They also can very partially detox from plant defense compounds, but not completely, and not to the extent that all these other animals that are clearly designed to eat plants can. And that brings us to the 5th argument, which is that human physiology is like that of a carnivore. We don't have the same physiology as something that's meant to eat plants. So for starters, we have eyes facing forward, just like other carnivorous animals, like dogs, for example, as you can see in this picture. Herbivorous animals usually have eyes like this facing outward, so they get a bigger scope and are able to spot the greenery and vegetation more easily. Also, our stomach acidity is very, very low on the pH scale. We have a very acidic stomachs, and clearly, the more acidic your stomach is, the more carnivorous your diet needs to be. For example, cows are here at around 5 or 6, so are monkeys who eat leaves and berries. And as you get closer to the carnivores, like lions and cats, we get even more acidic on the pH scale. And humans are even more acidic than that, which in theory means that we are supposed to be even more carnivorous than even lions and cats are. Some other examples are, for example, gorillas, which are clearly meant to be able to eat plants that they do because they have a very long colon with very, very long, windy structure that's clearly able to ferment a lot of fiber. And their colon is twice the size of their small intestine. They also have billions of microbes that is able to give them this high in gut fermentation to ferment fiber into short-chain fatty acids to absorb them. Humans have no such, hardly any such mechanisms, and they have a very short colon that's only half the size of the small intestine, clearly not meant for very fibrous materials. And also, we chew food up and down just like a carnivore would. See, this is how a cow chews. It chews left to right. We chew up and down. Now, some people might say we can still move our jaws left to right. Doesn't that mean we're herbivores? Well, no, we probably have the ability to chew side to side from back before we became Homo sapiens, when we were still sort of monkeys, and we were probably eating berries approximately 3 to 4 million years ago. And then we just never lost the ability, because in order to lose a physiological ability, there has to be a negative selection pressure that makes it more advantageous to not have that ability. And there isn't anything that would evolve us to have to be that way. But still, we predominantly don't use left to right chewing like a herbivorous animal does. We use up and down chewing, just like a carnivorous animal does. Now, the 6th argument is the natural intuition argument. The logic of this argument is basically that animals just know instinctively, based on their intuition, what they need to eat. No one needs to tell a grass that needs to bend down and eat grass, or a goat that needs to bend down and eat grass. They just do it. No one needs to tell lions that they need to hunt for meat. They just naturally, instinctively do it. So what do humans naturally, instinctively eat? Well, we can look at this by looking at children who are the least sort of quote-unquote brainwashed, have the least amount of knowledge in their head, and just are purely instincts and intuition. And everybody knows how kids hate vegetables and will want to spit them out. Give a baby broccoli, it'll hate you for it. Give a baby a piece of bacon, for example, or a meat, it'll love you for it. Kids love bacon. Kids love meat. It's because this is what they naturally, instinctively want to eat as humans. Now, I will give you a quick caution, though. There is some caution that you have to be had, some nuance with this argument, which is that some people might say, what about things like cookies and cake and chips and snacks? Kids love those, so therefore those must be extremely healthy things. What's the difference between these and how kids love meat? Well, the difference is that these foods are unnatural. They're made of artificial synthetic flavors and don't exist in nature, unlike meat and plants do. So you can't rely on their intuition, on their natural intuition, to decide on the health of unnatural items that are supposed to be foreign to the human body. Now let's bring us to the 7th argument, which is actually one that I thought of myself, which is called the Randle cycle argument. Now, if you don't know what the Randle cycle is, basically it's a type of mechanism in the human body that occurs, that gets upregulated whenever you eat a diet consisting a lot of both fuel sources, that being both carbs and fat. So if you have both carbs and fat, essentially, it's going to be a gross oversimplification of the mechanism, but essentially your cells, mitochondria, get filled with energy from either one of the two, carbs or fat. But then if you eat both of them, so both carbs and fat in high amounts, now there's already carbs in the cell, or already fat in the cell, and now the other one is knocking on the door with a lot of insulin trying to get in, but the cell has to close itself down to be able to keep itself safe because it's already been filled with this energy fuel. So that makes you very insulin sensitive and also causes you to spike your insulin more, which is going to leave you for more fat storage and just things that you don't want. So basically, the Randle cycle tells us either a high fat and low carb diet or a low fat and high carb diet. And what that looks like translated into food groups is basically high carb, starchy, low fat foods such as plants and grains, or not a lot of those, and a lot of animal foods that are a lot more fatty and have basically no carbs. And well, which of these two is better? It's a pretty clear answer. Plants are missing 15 micronutrients such as vitamin A, B6, B12, D3, K2, etc., etc. Meanwhile, you can get just based on analysis, there's every essential nutrient can be found in meat and animal foods. And also, as well as going back to the other arguments, like how plants have toxins inherently in them, and also that we've evolved eating meat for most of our speciation. So basically, the Randall cycle argument just emphasizes the dichotomy between how stark the contrast has to be in the diet between the two, and kind of puts out the logic of having a quote-unquote balanced diet, or everything in moderation diet. Because clearly that doesn't work out here, because if you mix high carb and high fat, then you're going to lead to problems. And clearly, high fat, low carb is the right option. And this brings us to the final argument, which is the eighth argument, which I like to call the anecdotal argument. Now, this is definitely the least scientific argument, but it's a good argument for getting to convince people inferentially to at least try a carnivorous way of eating and eating more like with their nature to see all the benefits. So obviously, there's a famous statistic you probably heard of, which is that 84% of vegans or vegetarians quit within 5 years, but with most of them being due to health reasons. So clearly, that's not really working out for them. Meanwhile, carnivores, on the other hand, go on YouTube, under any carnivore video, you could find hundreds, if not thousands, of comments of people saying how it's changed their life to eating more like their natural diet and how they really should be eating and how much benefit they have. Also, look at any video of anyone trying it. They'll tell you about the outrageous benefits. So clearly, there's an option that's way better than the others. All right, that brings me to the end of the video, guys. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed some real hard facts, and see you next time.